Hello and welcome to our second workbook in the Ansible series. Okay, so as you can see here, the topology is slightly different than the first video that we actually done. So I'm going to use the same format as what I used for some of my other videos, where I create a workbook in the background. The workbook itself will give us fictional tasks, and within the workbook as well I'll also put in the solutions, the commands that you need to do, in this case what you need to do for your playbooks and stuff like that. And then when I upload this to YouTube, there will be a link to my GitHub and to the corresponding blog post for it, which will have these files, including the evng file, etc., for you to download at your leisure. Eventually what's going to happen is, once we get through, I'm looking at probably about 10 to 14 or so workbooks. Once they're all done, we'll end up merging them all into one big mega workbook. But anyway, that's by the by. Let's get cracking. So in our scenario, your company has installed 4 Cisco satellite routers in the network, one basically at each POP site. So while the entire network is not live, it's not able to pass customer traffic because we've not really configured it, we've been tasked by management to use Ansible to do some minor configurations on the new routers. So routers 1, 2, 3 and 4. So these are the satellites coming off of Manchester, London, Asia and America. Okay, so what we need to do with this, our task is to build our Ansible host file for the 4 new routers and use the address schema as below. So 192.168.47.x, x is the router number. We want to use the company's secure SSH details of YouTube and YouTube1 for the password. We want to, once we've done that, we want to use some Ansible Ad-Hoc commands. We've not spoken about them yet, but we will use some Ansible Ad-Hoc commands to test reachability. And then once we've done that, we're going to write a playbook that will basically display the routing table of all 4 routers. And then, we will fix any problems that we may encounter when we see the actual display of the first playbook. Okay, so basically what's happening here is, in the previous video we sat there and we done copy and paste. Okay, that's great, but we really need to know how to actually write this. Okay, so what we'll do, let's jump on to our IDE, in which case I'm using VS Code. You can use whatever you like. You don't have to use VS Code. You can use Anaconda. You can use just the normal Python interpreter if you want. You can use anything. It's entirely up to you. It literally depends what you have access to. Okay, so our first task, if we remember right, is to create our host file. Okay, so let's create the host file and get that built. So let's do am I in the right thing? Yep. Let's do touch host. Okay, so I typed in touch host. No, I didn't type touch host. Let's remove that. Okay, so touch. Okay, so when you do touch, basically that just creates an empty file. You notice we don't give it an extension. This is automatically an INI format. You can use a YAML format as well, but we don't have to do that just yet. That's a little bit more advanced. We'll do that in a later video. So basically, if I open up my host file now, I can now start to build it up. So I'm going to call this group Edge. And now we're going to put in the router name. So in this case, the first one is going to be R1. And now we need to tell it what the IP address is. So it's going to be R1 is going to be Ansible host. So Ansible_host equals, and then we did give it the IP address. So I know it's going to be 192.168.47.21 for router 1. And now we'll do router 2. Now you notice how once I've put the first lot in, like Ansible host, I can now actually just tab it out. It's one good thing with Visual Code, and that's going to equal 192.168.47.22, and we're going to do R3, and it's going to do Ansible host equals 192.168.47.23, and R4 Ansible host equals 192.168.47.24. Okay, so we now have listed the actual host names and the corresponding IP addresses with them, so that's brilliant. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to do my variables for this particular group. Now there's multiple ways you can do this. You can put the variables on the actual same line as the actual host, so we do R1 Ansible host, its address, and then we can do network connection type, we can do username, we can do password. You can do that, that's not a problem. It becomes quite long and tedious because you then have to start repeating it for every single line, and that's something we don't want to do. So we'll do the vars, so we just need to do them once. So let's do edge vars. Okay, fantastic. Right, so anything we put on here now under the edge vars is going to be the default for this particular group, or anything that is in this particular group as well. So let's do Ansible underscore user, and this is going to be the username, and the username in this is going to be super secure as YouTube. And now we can do our Ansible underscore SSH password, Ansible underscore SSH underscore password, and that is going to be again super secure, YouTube 1. Okay, that's fantastic. Now we can say what port we're going to be using. We know it's SSH, so we know it's going to be port 22, but there's no harm in actually confirming that. Port equals 22. And now what we can do, we can tell it what sort of network connection type we're going to use. Now you will see in some playbooks that the playbook itself, they specify what network connection type that they use, which is fine. You can do that if you like, and we'll have a look at that later. Or you can actually again specify it in the actual variables, because don't forget, let's say you have other devices in here that don't use the same network connection type, then you're going to have to sit there within your playbooks if you're adding the network connection type in and start making adjustments to it. So that's why using the variables can be such a good idea. So let's do Ansible underscore connection, and that's going to equal and that's going to equal network CLI. Okay, so this is basically telling us it's going to use the command line to interact with the devices. Okay, so now we need to tell it what sort of operating system we're using. So we're going to do Ansible underscore network underscore OS equals, and that's going to be Cisco iOS, or cisco.ios.ios.ios.ios. There we go. So we have now completely built from scratch our first host file. Let's save that. So we'll just do a Control S to save it. That's brilliant. Let's see what I have in the actual directory. All I have is the host. I don't have an Ansible config file. Now, how Ansible works is that if you don't have a configuration file, it will pull the main configuration file from the global installation of Ansible. So that's why you often see that people just throw in a quick Ansible config file into each individual directory that they're working in. So let's get out of this and let's go back to, okay, so go back to the automation folder. I see I have a Ansible config file there. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to just send that to lab 2. Let's do an ls now. Oops, not in capitals. Okay, we can see the Ansible config file is there, and it's actually appeared in here. So if we have a look at it, and it's telling us that we can see that there's the host file there already, because that // just indicates it's in the same directory. So that's fantastic. So we've done the first task. So we've created our host file. So what's the next task here? Use the company security. Yeah, we've done that. Use an ad hoc command to test reachability. Okay, so in the first video we seen that we had Ansible playbooks. We run a playbook, that's great, but you can run single command line commands. They're called ad hoc commands, which will use what's in the current host file unless you specify a different one, and it can run any particular Ansible module against that. So if I was to do if I was to go here and do an Ansible ping, so Ansible space -m for module ping. So because I'm not specifying any host file, it's going to use the only host file that's already here, which is, you know, exactly what we want, and this is referenced from the Ansible config file. Now I can turn around and say, right, let's just ping, say, R1 and see what happens. All right, now even though it's called a ping, it's not actually an ICMP ping like we're used to using. What this actually does, and this is why it's so good to test connectivity, is it will attempt an SSH connection to the device. Again, doesn't matter whether it's a router, a server, a firewall, and it will then use the username and password that you specified in your actual host file or within a variable file, which we'll be doing at a later date, and it will then send a ping. It calls it a ping, and if it gets a response, as we can see here, we have a ping and a pong. This just tests completely that we have connectivity, not just reachability that we would normally test when we do a network ping. We would test reachability, but now we've tested that we actually have connectivity with Ansible. Okay, so we chose one device out of everything that was in the actual host file, but let's do all of them. Let's test all of our connectivity. So do the same command, Ansible space -module ping, and then all. And as we can see, R1, R2, R3, and R4, they've been fully successful. So what we know now is that when we create any playbook, that we shouldn't have any problems whatsoever with the playbook being able to connect to the actual devices. Whether they run or not, well, that depends on what you put in your playbooks. But getting the connectivity, that should be fine and dandy. Okay, so let's have a look, and the next task on here was write this playbook to display the routing table of all 4 routers. Okay, interesting. So let's jump back to the command line, and we're going to create our first playbook in YAML. So let's clear this, and let's do a touch, and we'll call it interface.yaml, interface.yml. Okay, so we can see now that we have our interface.yaml file there. Remember, as I was saying, yeah, it says you've got instructions there. Just type something, and it will dismiss that. So there we go. Get rid of that. Okay, so came back. Okay, so with a YAML file, we need to, or generally need to, start it off with 3 dashes. It's not mandatory. You can run your commands with your playbooks without that, but this is the universal signification that the file is a YAML file. Okay, so the first thing we do is we need to give it a name. So we do it in this format. So name, and let's call it, oh, I don't know, show interfaces. And then we need to give it the actual hosts. Now the thing is, when you're using YAML, indentation is key. If you get the indentation wrong, you'll get a failure in your playbook. So let's do our, tell it what host we're going to connect to. So we're going to connect to, and the hosts are going to be, if we go back to our host file, it's going to be edge, because I want to connect to all of them. If I want to, I could just put R1, R2, R3, or R4. but in this case I want to connect to everything, so I'm going to say edge. Now if I had multiple different groups here, I could just put all, but we don't want, but since we only have one lot, then edge would do fine. So so edge, okay, that's fantastic. Okay, and we need to tell it that we don't want it to gather facts. We don't want that. That can be pretty intensive. Okay, so now we need to tell it the tasks. All right, now when I was saying indentation matters, it does. So we're going to go two in under tasks, give our little line there, and then tell it what we actually want it to do, what the name of it's going to be first. So the name of the first task is going to be, let's do a run show IP route. Okay, great stuff. Now we need to tell it what module that we're going to run this actually with. So we're going to run a command module. Now if we have a quick look on, so we're on the Ansible community documentation, and we're looking at this just for Cisco iOS. This will work for Cisco iOS XE. They also have the likes of, as we can see here, modules for iOS XR, Meraki's, the Nexuses, the unified comms platforms as well. So these are all of the general modules that they support, and each module will do something differently. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a look at the iOS command module. I said this is a reference resource that you will be coming back to all the time while you're automating with Ansible. There is so much here. At the end of the day, any course, I mean, this is only going to be, you know, a short, 10 to 15 video workshop, but even if you used to do a 10, 15, 20, 30 hour course on Ansible, you're never going to learn everything. It's impossible. There's so much. So you'll always be referring back to this, especially when you're going into vendors that you've not used before. So you can see you have some examples that they give you. They tell you what you can do, what sort of things you can run, how you can list them, but they also give you the actual some examples that you can use as well. In this case, Cisco iOS command, show version, things like that, so you can actually start building out and testing yourself. So with that out of the way, let's continue with our first playbook. So what we're going to use, we now know that we're going to use the cisco.ios_command module. cisco.ios_command. So in the past it just used to be cisco.ios, but they branched it off and changed it. You can still get away with using that, but not every newer device actually supports that correctly. Okay, so we're going into the command syntax now, and we need to tell it what commands we're going to do. So again, we'll go through two spots. So our commands, again another, remember, indentation, another two spots, and now we're going to tell it what command we want to do. Let's do a show IP route. Okay, that's fantastic. Now that's all we need to do to run the command, but the thing is we need to be able to actually see the output. Otherwise, if we can't see the output, then we don't know what we're looking at. The command is still run. So if you're going to just push something out to a router, a server, or something like that, where you just want fire and forget, send it out and it's going to fix it, that's fine, not a problem. But in our case, we want to see what the output is. So what we're going to do, we're going to sit there and we're going to register the output of the actual command. So register, and we're going to just call it output. Again, if you've done anything when it comes to the likes of Python, then you'll know, or any other sort of programming, you'll know that you're just creating variables. So what we're saying with this register output is anything that's shown, anything that comes from the command, just register it and send it to the variable called output, and we'll call upon that variable later on. So now we need to make another play, another task. So we'll just make another little dash there, and what we wanted to do, we wanted to display the actual output. Okay, fantastic. So what we want to do now is we're going to use what's called the debug. There are other ways to do this as well. Everything that we're doing within our Ansible training, there are always other ways you may come across in your further studies, ways to improve upon what we're doing that works better for you. Okay, so what we want to do, we want to do our variable. Oops, put that the wrong way around. And the variable is going to be, I'm pointing at it on the screen, like you can see what I'm pointing at, is going to be output. And then what we want to do, we want to send it as standout lines, so, or standard output lines. So it's going to be standout lines. Okay, there we go. That should do the actual trick. And let's save this. So just do a Control S to save. So what we're going to do, we're going to try and run it and see what we can see. So let's run this playbook then. So let's do Ansible-playbook, and we've called it interface.yaml. Let's have a little gander. And this is the point where, because I'm recording, it will sit there and you go, no, I'm not working. So it's attempting to connect. Oh, there we go. Fantabulous. Right, so the first thing that we see is the task run show IP interface brief. It done that, so that was fine. Now you'll notice that this task here, display output, that was this other task that we done. Without it, all that we would have got was okay, okay, okay. So we need a way to actually see what's going on. Now later on in further videos, we'll also change this as well, where we will see what was going on, but we can actually have outputs automatically saved to files on your on your devices, which is fantastically good if you want to do things like config backups and stuff like that. So let's have a look at the output here. Okay, so as we can see, we've got a default static root, gateway of last resort. We've only got the one IP address that's on there. Okay, that's fine. It's exactly the same with router 2. Okay, so we have our gateway of last resort, we have our static root. Okay, it's fine. Let's have router 3. Oh, okay, so gateway of last resort is not set on routers 3. Okay, what about routers 4? Okay, the gateway of last resort is not set on router 4 either. So that means that while we expect routers 2 and routers 1 to be able to break out, routers 3 and routers 4 won't. So that's a problem. So according to our workbook, fix any problems the display helps us to discover. So what we're going to do in this case, we're going to create another playbook to actually add a static root onto the devices. And this will give us another opportunity to see that how Ansible works. If something's already in place, it won't do anything with it. Okay, so let's actually then create another playbook to see if we can fix this. So let's call this one static root.yaml. Okay, and there we have our static root there, so we can actually start building this out again. Brilliant. Okay, so let's get cracking and let's call it name, and we'll call it add static for the actual. That's embarrassing. But then at my age, you know, what the hell? You get used to things that are embarrassing, to be honest with you. Okay, so add static. Say we need to do our hosts, and our hosts are going to be again edge, which is absolutely fine. That's what we want. Gather facts we don't want to do. And we need to now give it, we can give it if we want to, the connection as network CLI, you know, but it's not necessary, but you will often see this in there, but we're not going to bother with this. Okay, so let's go down now and do our tasks. Alrighty. Okay, so our first task, we'll give it our name, well, root. Don't forget the top name is just the name of the actual playbook itself, not the name of the file, but the name of the playbook. But we need to obviously give each individual task a particular name as well. So that's great. Now we need to tell it what module that we're going to use. So we're going to use Cisco iOS.ios, but this time we're going to do _config rather than command, because we're not running the show command, we're pushing the config on there, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so it's going to be cisco.ios.ios _config. Alright, fantastic. Okay, now what we need to do, we need to put what lines of config we're going to do. So we go through in indentation of 2, do our lines command, indentation of 2 as well, and now we need to tell it what we're going to do. So we could do, let's say, an IP route 0000 for the subnet, and where we want it to go, in which case 192.168.47.2. okay, and that is it. We don't need to see an output. We don't need to see what is actually what's going on. All we want is at the end, where we seen here that the tasks were run, they were successful, like we saw on the last one. It ran 2 tasks. The first task was to actually what did we do in the last one? It was like 3 minutes ago and I've totally forgotten. Yeah, so we connected and done the show IP route. So that was one task, and the second task was to actually gather the actual output so we could see it. So we could see that it done that absolutely fine, but we don't need to see the output. We just need to see whether it's actually done what we wanted it to do. So let's save this file. So this is our second one, so let's run this and see what happens. So let's go back on that ansible playbook, and we called it static root.yaml, and let's see what happens. Oh, and we got an error. What error do we have here? Ah, I see the problem. Okay, so indentation again is key. You notice how I haven't indentated this properly. So let's indentate that. Now I should have noticed that, because the actual CI had the little, if you go back, the CI there had come up in red, so I should have noticed that was wrong, but I just carried on. Okay, and obviously now that we've indentated that, we need to indentate that a little bit more as well, by 2. Alright, now let's have a little look and see what happens with this. Okay, so it's having a look, trying to see if it can connect to the playbook. Okay, excellent. So looks like it's connected to R1 and R2. You notice it came up green, they're okay, but we have changed R3 and R4. So R3 and R4 is made a change, and in the recap at the bottom we can see this, that R3 and R4 there's a change that's actually happened, but R1 and R2 it's not changed anything because the static root was already there. Let's have a look at the original playbook that we done then and see if we can see that. So let's do what did we actually name it? Interface. Did we name it interface? I can't remember. Yep, interface. Okay, so let's have a look at interface. Let's run this playbook again. Alright, okay, so we've got our confirmation. It's run the 2 tasks, it's run the show IP route, and it's run the display. You notice here that on R4 we now have a gateway last result, so we've got the static route set up, and on R3 we've also got the gateway of last result, so that's fantastic. Okay, so that didn't go too badly. We've covered a fair amount in this particular video. We've had a quick look at an ad-hoc command from the command line. We've actually written our own host file rather than just copy and pasting over. We've written 2 ansible playbooks, one to run a show command and the second one to actually run the configuration command as well. And again, we've gone through and verified that what we wanted to do has actually worked. So I believe that we've covered everything that's required in the actual workbook itself. We've covered everything, so that's great. So I hope you've enjoyed the second video in the Ansible series, workbook 2. I will be starting probably tomorrow or the next day on workbook 3 and getting another video out. What we're going to do, we're going to expand more and more and more. We're going to be, increasing what we're doing within the lab, and then eventually we'll start increasing the lab out even further, so we can start doing OSPF, BGP, maybe some ISIS, maybe some layer 2 VPNs and things like that. We'll get some good stuff going. Anyway, I thank you for your time, and I hope you have a nice day and you enjoyed the video.